So when we're looking at bipedalism with the skull, the main area that we're looking at is the positioning of the foramen magnum. So with a non-biped, like this chimpanzee here, what we're looking at is the distance from the vomer, the back of the vomer and the sphenoid, to that anterior portion of the foramen magnum, to that edge. So if we look closely here, we can see that there's a long distance. Also, if we look kind of from the side view, here's our foramen magnum, so we can see how angled it is, how far out it comes in terms of its positioning. Let me turn that around for you, actually. So that you've got the foramen magnum kind of coming out the back or towards the back of the skull, if you can kind of see it there. You can see it from the back view. Right. In a biped, it's directly underneath. So this is an early biped. This is an Ardipithecus skull. So here we've got that foramen magnum directly underneath. It's pretty close to where the vomer would be and that sphenoid right here. And if we look at it from the direct back view, we can't see the foramen magnum. Whereas here, see how they're in the same position, but we can see the bottom of that foramen magnum. So in a human, a modern human, if we look at that same positioning, here's that bottom picture, very close to that sphenoid, very anteriorly. If we look straight from the back, we cannot see the foramen magnum. So if we're looking at it in terms of positioning, the spinal cord is coming out straight down with the human, which is a biped. Same thing with our Ardipithecus, it's coming straight down out of the bottom of the skull. But with our chimp here, it's angling back. So it's angling towards the back, which tells us that the skull is going to be positioned in front of the vertebral column, whereas in our Ardipithecus and our modern human, it's positioned directly underneath the skull instead of behind. So that's the foramen magnum and bipedalism in the skull.
For the vertebral column, what we see as a difference between bipeds and non-bipeds has to do with the curvature of the spine. So if you look at the picture here of the human, you'll notice that we have one curvature in the neck and one curvature in the lower back. Whereas if you look at the gorilla or the chimp or the orangutan or the gibbon, which in this picture, by the way, is double size, what you see with all of those is a single curve from hip to neck. This puts their upper body weight in front of their feet. So as you see, the center of gravity then is forward. Whereas in the human, because we have that neck curve, that's going to balance the head over the shoulders. And then we have that lower back curve, that's going to balance the upper body over the hips, which allows us to stand up vertically, putting our center of gravity over the feet. So think about it this way. If you stand up and lean forward, so that your upper body is leaning kind of in the same position as this chimpanzee here, you'll feel if you try and take a step like you're going to fall forward. That's because your center of gravity is in front of your feet. Versus when you stand up and walk normally, you don't really feel like you're going to fall over. Because again, your head is balanced on your shoulders. That is from the cervical curve. And the upper body is balanced over the lower body because of that lower lumbar curve.
So when we're looking at bipedalism and locomotion in the pelvis, here you can see two different pelves. This one is of a modern human, this is of a modern chimpanzee. And what you're hopefully being able to see here is the positioning of this ilium is high and flat. And if we look at it from a side view, very, very flat, and it's on the back of the body. Whereas in our human, which is of course our biped, that ilium wraps around the side. So if we look at it from the side view here, you can see how that ilium's on the side. So it's shorter, top to bottom here. It's shorter and it's wider. So short, wide, and on the side for our biped, whereas long, thin, and on the back for our non-biped, whether it's a quadruped or a suspensory animal, it's going to have that same basic shape. So when we look at then from the top view, you can see how small the opening is in that non-biped versus our biped, and you can really see, looking straight down there, how flat and on the back that ilium is, versus in our biped, where it very much curves around the sides. So if we look at that biped in a single bone, and let me just grab a single bone here. Okay. When we look at the shape, if we're holding the single, here's our front and center. So again, that ilium is on the side. Okay. If we look at that same positioning, it would just be looking at one half of this pelvis bone, and you can still see that ilium's flat on the back. So if we look at an early biped, we're going to have a similar bone structure. Okay. Again, here's our front and center. So if we put that flat, it's going to look much more like our biped here, where that ilium's on the side versus on the back. So when these sit next to each other, you can very much see how we have the wider and shorter ilium. Okay. And since here's the pubic symphysis, when we put them up, so that pubic symphysis is front and center, that ilium is on the side versus on the back, as what we would see with a non-biped. So when we look at bipedalism in the femur, which is the next area that we're going to look at, we see a big difference, particularly in the distal end of the femur here. The head of the femur, very similar. We do see a little bit of differences in the neck area, in the shape of the neck. So if you look at the shape of the neck in our biped here, it's going to be wider here to here, and then if we flip it sideways, it's going to be narrower. So it's going to be kind of an oval shape to this whole circumference. Whereas in our non-biped, that's much more circular. It's about the same width, top to bottom, as it is side to side. So more of a rounded neck there. And that just has to do with the pressure. On a human, we've got all the weight being put just on the head of the femur, so we've got a lot of weight bearing in this area, whereas in our quadruped or a suspensory animal, it's going to share weight among 4 different limbs, so it's going to have less pressure being placed on this area. But in terms of the distal end, what we're looking at primarily is the size of the condyles. So in a non-biped, in a quadruped or a suspensory animal, the back leg needs to sit straight on the tibia, directly below it. So the 2 condyles need to be roughly the same size. So I've got my kind of line over here so that you can see a straight line. And when I put those 2 condyles straight on that line, you can see that the femur is very, very straight. Okay? So it's going to come straight up and down as we're looking at it. So if I hold it vertically, okay, I'm going to hold it like that, and I'm going to be able to see that the femur itself is straight up and down. It doesn't angle one way or another. So it's going to be very, very straight. I'm going to put the I'll put this in the side for a moment. In our human, again, if I put those condyles right up against my horizontal piece here, you can see that the femur is going to angle. So if I flip it over and we look at the condyles with the femur straight, you can see that one condyle dips down from the other. So when I hold it up on a table, that is actually going to angle. Okay? It's not going to be straight up and down. It's not going to be vertical. It's actually going to sit at an angle. Versus our straight one, if I'm putting it like that. So you can kind of see that angling versus the straight femur. So if I again put those together against that flat line, you can see how much that femur angles when sitting on the tibia. So if this were sitting straight on the tibia versus the non-biped. Now if we bring our early bipeds into it, just kind of spreading these guys apart a little bit, you're going to see that they angle even more. And that has to do with their height. So we have to go the same distance side to side, right? Because what this does, what these larger condyle and smaller condyles do, is they bring the knees together. So when the pelvis, okay, so if this is sitting in the pelvis here, let me get the pelvis here. So when it's sitting in the pelvis, okay, it's coming straight down from the pelvis and angling in. This is what brings your knees together. This is also what allows you to stand on one foot. Okay, so if you think about bringing your knees together versus them straight down, okay, from pelvis straight down to knee, straight down to foot, what we've got is the feet coming together instead of being out here as the knees come together. So when the feet come together, the center of gravity now is just between each foot. Okay? And that's a very close distance. So now if you pick up one foot, the center of gravity only has to move an inch or two from one side to the other, versus when your feet are out here, when they're hip width apart, and you go to pick up one foot, the center of gravity, which is halfway in between, has to shift all the way over to that one foot. So what I would like you to do right now is go ahead and stand up wherever you're at, and stand with your feet hip width apart. And that would simulate having what we call that varus knee, okay, or that straight knee. Then try and pick up one foot. Doesn't matter the right or the left, just pick up one foot. And what you should have noticed here is that as you did that, you had to shift all of your body weight to your right or to your left. Now stand with your feet together and do the same thing. Okay? Now you're simulating that valgus knee, which is what we see in humans and other bipeds. So bring the knees together, feet together. Now pick up one foot. You should have noticed that as you did that, very little movement was required. You didn't really have to shift your weight one way or the other. You were able to just kind of pick up one foot. Right? And that's because with the feet together, you don't have to move that center of gravity very far, and it works with the pelvis, because if you remember back to the pelvis, and I'm going to bring one in again here, with the ilium on the side, we have muscles now that are coming up the side of the body, attaching there. Those are your gluteal muscles, and they're going to support the body weight and allow you to pick up that foot without really having to shift your muscles. Okay, there are hip stabilizer muscles, and they're what's going to attach right here. So in terms of being a biped, the change in the pelvis has to correspond with the change in the femur to allow us to pick up one foot and leave the other one on the ground while not shifting our weight back and forth every step we take. For an example of this, try walking with your feet hip width apart. Okay, you'll notice it's very, very difficult and it's very uncomfortable versus walking with your feet together. So that's the femur, and again a little bit pulled in of that pelvis for looking at bipedalism. The last area that we look at for bipedalism in the body is the feet. Now here I have a non-biped foot and a biped foot. And you should right off notice one of the big differences is the positioning of the big toe or the hallux. In a non-biped, they need to be able to grasp with their hind foot. So we need to have that big toe divergent, meaning it's sticking off to the side, kind of like our hand does. Okay? And they can then grasp with that hind foot as they're holding onto a tree branch or something of that nature. However, when they come down to the ground, okay, if we simulate with our hands, when they come down to the ground, bring those knees together, because remember the valgus knee brings the knees together. Now we've got some problems here. We've got our big toe overlapping. So we need to bring that big toe in line with the rest of the toes. And that's what we see in the biped, is that big toe coming in line with the rest of the toes. Now, as it does that, as it comes in line, it actually creates an arch to the foot. And hopefully you can see this here. But if I put my finger across, you should see that the three middle toes, let me see if I can flip it around maybe the other way. The three middle toes aren't touching my finger. There's a space in there, whereas the big toe and the little toe are. That's what we call the longitudinal arch, and it's because it arches side to side and leaves that arch in the middle of the foot. Okay, that's specific to bipeds, and it has to do with the shock absorption of rolling from our heel to our toes and pushing off as we walk. In our non-biped here, we don't have that, so these guys can't really roll their foot, not the same way we can, okay, because of this divergent big toe. Now, both feet have a second arch called the transverse arch, and that's what curves the foot from heel to toe, okay, this arch here. And you can see that same thing, turn them this way, that curvature from heel to toe in our non-biped. Now, the last big change that hopefully you see here is the length of the toes. So here's where our toes start. Okay, so back here's ball of the foot. Here's where the toes start. And you can see, the big toe, not that different in length, but now look at the other toes if we put these a little bit closer here. you can hopefully see that our toes as bipeds are much shorter than the toes for non-bipeds. And again, that goes back to that need to grasp with the feet. This situation ends up something like trying to walk in shoes that are way too big or trying to walk in flippers. And if we try and walk in flippers, our feet tend to get caught on the ground as we roll our foot forward, and we have a tendency to fall or injure ourselves, and usually break a toe or two. So these guys can't really roll their foot the way we do because those toes are too long. So over time, those toes have shortened as individuals who had longer toes didn't survive as well as individuals with shorter toes who survived better. So this slow change over time, slow evolution from a divergent big toe, long toes, to short toes with an inline big toe, provides for that shock absorption and that rolling gait that we see with bipeds that we can't see in non-bipeds.